Okay, let's dive into something that might seem quite specific at first glance.
Hmm.
We're talking about the search for the next head of a national central bank, the Dutch central bank in this case.
Right.
But connect that, if you will, to this absolutely massive question facing Europe right now.
Which is,
How is it going to fund, well, everything? Shoring up defenses, the green transition, staying competitive in global tech.
and it turns out those things are really deeply intertwined. That's
Sure.
the puzzle we're unpacking today.
Yeah, it really is. We've looked at quite a stack of sources digging into this. European investment, defense spending, and this term that comes up again and again, Eurobonds.
Which often causes confusion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our mission in this deep dive really is to cut through the noise, the jargon, the politics.
Get to the heart of it.
Yeah. What's actually driving this conversation? What are the real financing options? And maybe most importantly for you listening, what are the potential consequences?
And we've got some really insightful material here, particularly drawing on an expert perspective, someone deep in banking and finance who's been right in the middle of this debate.
So get ready. We're going to explore the economics, the politics, even a bit of surprising history behind Europe's financial evolution. Let's jump right in.
Okay, so first off, it's striking how this national appointment, the Dutch central bank presidency, immediately highlights the European dimension.
Klesnot's term ends July 1st.
That's right. But no successor has been named yet, which apparently mirrors what happened back in 2011. A bit of deja vu.
And the sources mention the kind of profile they're likely looking for. Significant managerial experience, maybe someone from the Ministry of Finance.
Seems logical. It's a
Yeah,
big job. And the European link is, well, it's direct and it's significant.
Because the DNB president sits on the ECB Governing Council.
Precisely. Representing the Netherlands. That's where the Eurozone's monetary policy gets decided. It's a powerful seat at the European table.
And here's that specific connection the sources flagged. The Dutch finance minister's stance on European debt paper, let's call them Eurobonds for now, that stance is apparently seen as relevant to choosing the next DNB chief.
And interestingly, Klesnot himself, the outgoing president, he's actually been a proponent of issuing European debt, specifically for financing what he calls European public goods.
Things that benefit the whole bloc.
Yes. Now, it's also mentioned that maybe unlike 14 years ago, things seem quieter this time. Fewer leaks, less obvious political alignment within the current coalition about who they favor.
Adds a bit of mystery to it.
It does. And these national dynamics, they're playing out against, well, a backdrop of some pretty intense pressures on Europe as a whole.
Right. Europe isn't just having this investment discussion for fun. It feels like it's being pushed into it.
That comes through really clearly in the sources. Several converging forces. First, obviously, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a massive wake-up call on security.
Hard security needs real money.
Absolutely. Then you've got the potential return of Trump in the U.S.
And his constant calls for Europe to spend way more on NATO defense.
Exactly. Which adds pressure, especially with that NATO summit coming up in The Hague. Europe needs to stand more on its own feet, defensively.
And the third pressure.
Global tech competition, fierce. U.S. versus China, particularly in chips, AI, you name it. And the worry is Europe's falling behind.
Which isn't just economic, it's strategic too. Future prosperity, autonomy.
And all this feeds into what people are calling the Draghi agenda.
Yeah.
After Mario Draghi's recent report.
Right, pushing for huge, coordinated European investment, energy transition, new tech, competitiveness.
He's got these massive, urgent needs. Defense, green, digital. We're talking hundreds of billions, maybe trillions needed.
Which leads to the fundamental problem the sources highlight. How do you actually pay for all of this?
And that question immediately surfaces the core tension. Should this be mainly national financing, or does it need some kind of European-level approach?
And understanding why that's so tricky, well, a bit of history helps, doesn't it?
It does. European cooperation, started after World War II. Coal and steel first.
Economic integration.
Yes. But there were early attempts at defense cooperation, too. Remember the European Defense Community Treaty?
Which failed. France didn't ratify it.
Exactly. Progress in Europe often seems to happen in these shocking and stumbling steps, often driven by crisis.
And even decades later, things like the single market. I mean, there was that big push in '92. But it's still not fully complete, is it? Sources mention an IMF report pointing out indirect trade barriers within the EU still exist.
Right. That difficulty in actually executing things across 27 member states where national interests often seem to win out.
It leads to that phrase, Europe shortchanging itself, not fully leveraging its collective weight.
And this persistent difficulty in execution, this is why the critique of that big recent financing effort, the Corona Recovery Fund, is so relevant now.
Ah, yes, the $750 billion toll fund from 2020.
Huge response to the pandemic shock. And it was unique, partly designed as redistribution, helping countries hit hardest, often those with higher debt already.
But the reviews haven't been universally glowing, have they?
Not at all. Sources point to a recent report from the European Court of Auditors in Luxembourg, described as devastating, very critical.
Ouch. What were the main criticisms?
Lack of clear objectives for the spending, weak governance, not enough transparency.
And because most of the money just went to member states.
Oversight became incredibly difficult. The sources use this term jomelin, basically implying things got a bit murky. Money disappeared into national systems without clear European accountability.
Right, sort of fudging it, perhaps?
Something like that. And this critique hangs heavy over new proposals. Like the idea for defense funding maybe $800 billion over 4 years, potentially $150 billion through EU debt lent to states.
The worry is you just repeat the same problems. Lack of oversight once the cash hits national capitals.
Exactly. Which leads directly to talk about an alternative model. Using the European Investment Bank, the EIB.
Okay, the EIB. It's presented as, well, a pretty established player. Been doing this kind of thing since 1977, apparently.
And it operates at a really significant scale. End of 2024, it had something like $435 billion in Eurobonds already on its balance sheet, bonds it issued itself.
So the argument for using the EIB for future big investments is what? That it's more professional, less political.
That's the core argument. It's seen as more project-focused, less politicized than just, handing money to national governments to spend as they see fit, potentially.
And there seems to be some political movement here. Sources mention a recent motion in the Dutch parliament.
Yes, initiated by a CDA leader supported by the VVD, asking the government specifically to explore the EIB's role in this Draghi investment agenda.
Interesting. It suggests maybe a potential shift, or at least an openness to this approach.
It does. But before we get deeper into the EIB model, we really need to clarify this term Eurobonds, because as you said, it gets used loosely.
Yeah, what does it actually mean in this context?
Critically, our sources define it like this. It's an obligation, a debt instrument, issued by an EU institution, could be the Commission, could be the EIB on the capital markets.
Okay.
And the key thing is, it's guaranteed by all 27 member states. So there's risk sharing involved. If one country gets into trouble, the others are effectively on the hook.
Got it. So based on that definition, the sources break down the ways you could use these bonds into 4 main categories. What's the first?
First is pooling existing national debt, taking all the historical debt from Italy, Germany, everyone, and putting it in one big European pot.
Which is dismissed pretty quickly, right? Politically impossible.
Totally unfeasible.
Right.
Fiscally prudent countries won't sign up to take on others' past debts.
Makes sense. What's number 2?
Pooling new national debt. So collectively financing the ongoing deficits of member states.
Again, politically toxic, and it creates that moral hazard problem, doesn't it?
It's exactly. Less incentive for national fiscal discipline if everyone else shares the burden. So 1 and 2 are basically non-starters.
Okay. Category 3.
That's the Corona Recovery Fund model we just talked about. Issue bonds at the EU level, then lend or grant the money to the member states for them to spend.
And we know the criticisms of that one. Oversight, transparency issues once the money goes national. The Court of Auditors report.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the 4th category.
Which is?
This is the one aligned with the EIB model.
Yeah.
And the one the expert in our sources seems to prefer. Issuing bonds at the European level specifically to finance specific, ring-fenced European investment projects.
Ah, so the money is tied directly to a project, not just general national budgets.
That's the key difference. The argument is it's more professional, more efficient. The EIB evaluates these projects.
How? Based on what criteria?
Based on business economics. Does it have a viable business plan? What's the potential cash flow, the profitability? Is it a sound investment?
And they don't fund the whole thing, usually.
Typically not. They often co-finance, maybe up to 50%. The rest has to come from elsewhere. National development banks, private investors like pension funds.
So it's less about Brussels politicians picking winners and more about technocrats at the EIB assessing the financial merits?
That's a fair way to put it, though it raises other questions.
Yeah.
The EIB is overseen at a high level by the finance ministers from all EU countries. They set strategy.
Okay.
But the actual project selection, the nitty-gritty analysis, is often described as bottom-up.
Meaning companies propose projects?
Yes, maybe even cross-border consortia. Imagine drone manufacturers from France and Germany teaming up, or battery makers from Sweden and Poland. They bring a project plan to the EIB.
And the EIB's technical experts assess it.
Exactly. Does the plan hold water? Is there a market? Are the contracts sound? It's meant to be a business economic evaluation, not primarily a political allocation between countries.
Okay, but here's the rub, isn't it? That tension. If you rely more on an institution like the EIB using these technocratic assessments, what happens to democratic accountability?
That's a really significant critique highlighted in the sources. If major decisions about what gets built, where huge investments flow across Europe, shift more towards a non-elected body like the EIB, well, where's the democratic control?
Even if the finance ministers provide oversight, they probably don't have the detailed expertise to second-guess every project assessment.
Right. Likely not. So the concern is, even if it's efficient, even if it's economically sound, does this process sideline national parliaments or even the European Parliament? Could it override national priorities, even if projects technically start bottom up?
It touches on that bigger philosophical point raised in the material about whether efficient structures are enough.
Right. This idea of philia, shared community or trust, and a retate civic virtue. The argument is that even the best designed systems can decay or be corrupted if that underlying spirit is missing. History is full of examples. Monarchy becoming tyranny, aristocracy becoming oligarchy.
Democracy becoming ochlocracy, mob rule.
Exactly. And you can perhaps see a faint echo of this in the rise of populism across Europe. That feeling among some citizens that the establishment, including Brussels institutions, is somehow detached.
Disconnected from national concerns.
Which brings us squarely to the risks involved in pursuing this more integrated European-level financing path.
Like what happens if national politics just shifts dramatically?
Yeah, we've seen shifts or potential shifts. Meloni in Italy, what might happen in France or Poland, the AfD gaining strength in Germany.
How does that affect these long-term pan-European projects or funding commitments?
It introduces uncertainty, potentially opposition, especially for something like shared defense funding. There's that argument mentioned via Lex Huguen about sacrificing national sovereignty in a core area.
Though the counter-argument on defense using the EIB model is that it's not necessarily about creating a single EU army.
Right. It could be more about financing cooperation between national armies. Standardization, joint procurement. Think about the deep cooperation already happening between, say, the Dutch and German militaries, making them work better together.
So the justification for any EU-level funding really has to be these European public goods, right?
Yeah.
Things that genuinely benefit the whole bloc.
That's the core argument from proponents.
Yeah.
Projects where the collective benefit clearly outweighs what any single nation could or would do alone.
And besides collective defense, what are the prime examples?
Pan-European energy infrastructure is often cited, like building huge solar arrays in the sunny south and the grid to get that power efficiently up north.
Although you mentioned there are counter-arguments there too, people arguing for more local energy.
Yes, that perspective, linked to Annelies Huygen, suggests localized energy might be more efficient or resilient in some cases. It's not a settled debate.
Okay, another big one.
Advanced chip factories in Europe. That's framed as collective security and competitiveness, reducing reliance on, say, Taiwan for those critical components and the machines to make them.
So those are the kinds of projects proponents say justify a European financing approach. But
Yeah.
even if you sort out the money, there are these big practical hurdles.
Huge implementation challenges, yes,
Yeah.
discussed in the sources. Just the basic problem of spending the money effectively.
Even with defense budgets rising, countries struggle to spend it all.
Exactly. Reports of underspending because they lack the people, the materials, the industrial capacity to absorb huge increases quickly.
I think the Dutch defense minister was quoted saying they can only realistically manage a few billion extra per year.
Something like that. It points to a deeper issue across multiple sectors needing investment. A massive lack of available labor.
Hundreds of thousands of vacancies across the EU economy in some places.
Yeah. And the sources touch on related domestic issues.
Yeah.
Like needing reforms in labor markets, addressing things like the allowance trap, the Toeslagenval in the Netherlands,
Yeah.
that might disincentivize work, especially full-time work for women.
The IMF has pointed this out too, apparently, and the need for France maybe not to lower its retirement age.
These are framed as fundamental challenges. tied to the mentality and the factual dynamic within populations. Who's actually going to do all this work, fill these jobs in manufacturing, green tech, even defense?
Which opens up that whole other complex debate about relying on migration versus national willingness to serve.
It's a really deep societal layer underneath the financial structures.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we really see this core tension exposed, don't we?
Absolutely. On one hand, the urgent need for massive European investment pushing towards, efficient, integrated, perhaps more technocratic solutions like the EIB model.
But on the other hand, that runs smack into complex national politics, big differences between member states, and these underlying societal issues, labor shortages, questions about shared identity.
It really makes you wonder if just reacting to external pressures like Putin or Trump, or focusing only on clever financial fixes, can actually resolve that internal fragmentation Europe faces.
Yeah. What really stands out from the sources is that central question. Can these European-level financing mechanisms, like the EIB project-based approach, really overcome the political divisions and channel investment effectively?
Or will those underlying political and societal fractures always limit their success, maybe even create new frictions?
It leaves us with a pretty provocative thought, I think. Can Europe realistically build, say, integrated defense or achieve tech sovereignty without first strengthening a genuine shared sense of European purpose among its people?
Or, and this is the other possibility, could the sheer necessity of funding these huge European public goods end up forging that unity itself, almost as a byproduct, whether leaders intend it or not?
Something definitely worth mulling over.
It's indeed.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.